You are listening to Creating Active Lives with me, Sarah Blytho, and my regular weekly guests, and we are all here to share the research, the science, and the strategies, as well as some of the fun, to help you to create a more active life. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Creating Active Lives with me, Sarah Blytho, and my guest this week, Will Behenna. Now, Will and I first started working together nearly 20 years ago on the Inclusive Fitness Initiative project. You can't see us, but neither of us looks a day older. Shows what fitness does for you. Yeah, we started working on the Inclusive Fitness Initiative project back in probably 2004, 2005. And we're both involved in developing awareness, developing training, and training a lot of instructors within that. And I know that activity is something you're really passionate about. Will has always been involved in disability sport and adventure since sustaining a spinal injury back in 1988. He was the first wheelchair user to get a degree in physical education and sports science from Loughborough University back in 1995. And, you know, Loughborough really is the sort of pinnacle of all of that. So that's an achievement that probably needs to be recognised a lot more. But it also gave you a really important insight into the lack of awareness surrounding disability sport development. And then from there, you've gone on to work in leisure management, into disability awareness training, into content creating, tutoring, advising in the field of physical activity and education, which is really, really important. You've also competed in quite a lot of sports at national and international level, but part of that is sport on the water, and that's what we're talking about today, which is inclusive paddleboarding. So tell us a little bit about this.
Well, my background has always been on the water. So I've done lots of different activities on the water, which I've always enjoyed. And I think I found kayaking as being the best one for me in terms of being the most accessible. So I've done quite a few trips abroad. I've done quite a lot of paddling on the Thames. But I always had a frustration that I could never pick up a kayak and move it around on dry land, and I was never able to roll a kayak. So I always had to go on with someone else, and it was enjoyable, but it was always a little bit frustrating. So I kind of put it to one side for a while because I tried to access a local club where I'm living in Dorset, and it was a bit difficult. I could only join the disability unit, and they would only meet up every third Wednesday of the month. And I was kind of like, I want to be just out paddling with other people. So that sort of kind of switched me off a little bit. And then when paddleboards sort of came to the fore, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I looked at them and I kind of thought, actually, that might work for me because I can blow it up, I can get on it, so I need to find a seat. So I went about finding a seat and then realised that none of them would help me to give me the postural support that I needed. So I then thought, well, I better build myself one. So I went into the shed and found some plywood that I had hanging around, and then started drawing, doodling. Then I managed to find a guy who supplies foam, and I then used that to line this sort of like wooden seat, painted it in marine paint so that it wouldn't all fall apart, fixed it to the paddleboard, and went out and tested it with some friends. And that was the start of getting out on a paddleboard.
Amazing. And it's something that you kind of, we think of paddleboarding as stand-up paddleboarding. Obviously, that's how it's kind of known. But you're making it much more inclusive by being able to sit and being able to kneel. And as you say, for people who maybe a kayak wouldn't necessarily be safe, or you wouldn't be able to use it in the same way, it sounds like it's a really, really good initiative. So tell me about Ripple Rebels then, because this is an organisation that you're working with, and we'd like to know more about them.
So they are a community interest company, and they set up by three really dynamic women who wanted to make paddleboarding more inclusive for all sorts of different groups within the local community. And I got in contact with them, sort of saying, look, this is my situation. It'd be great to kind of come along, because they were using a lake about 4 or 5 miles away from me. And I rocked up with all of my gear and kind of said, right, let's get on the water. And they were like, okay, let's do that. And then I just kind of got into regularly paddling with them. And they sort of started to understand a little bit about how I was working, because I paddle with two blades. So I use a kayak paddle instead of a single-bladed paddleboarding paddle, because when you're sitting down really low, you can't use a paddleboard paddle. You just go around in circles. So I tried to use one, but it was never going to work. But they were really supportive of me being on my paddleboard, but effectively using it like a kayak. And they sort of started to realize that actually maybe we need to change our mindset around that it's stand-up paddleboarding. And then we just got talking about how do we maybe look to extend what I'm doing. And that was when we put a bid into the British Canoe Union Stronger Together Fund to get some funding to explore the idea of making paddleboarding a bit more inclusive.
It's because it's I know that, you know, we are making moves with various sports into being a lot more inclusive over many years, decades, but outdoor adventure is something that isn't necessarily as well developed, is it, or as necessarily as inclusive and accessible. So what are the main challenges in that? So by outdoor, I don't just mean on the water, but obviously hiking, mountaineering and things, whereas I know people do them, but it's not, there's a lot more preparation that's maybe involved. But so what are the main challenges?
I think the main one is really just the environment. So the fact that you're outdoors as opposed to in a sports hall or on a hard surface, that you're on a coastal path, or you're on a piece of moving water, or you're trying to get onto a beach, or you're trying to climb up a hill, that the environment in itself is a bit restrictive. So there's long stretches of the coastal path around the southwest that would be impossible for me to do, just because of the geography of the land. So I think it's the environment that's probably the biggest challenge.
And is that kind of physically getting to the water as well as other outdoor places, or is it the perception?
There's a very weird sort of like interface where you've got the water and then you've got the land, and in an ideal world, if the levels were like very, very close to each other, then that's perfect. But in an ideal world, that's never the case. So you might have a slipway that's got a 45-degree slope on it, which is really difficult for lots of people to get down. Or you might have just a grass verge that then drops down into the water, which again, for the less confident paddler, might be a bit daunting. Or you're maybe getting onto a beach where you've got sand. So you've got the car park and then you've got the water, and there's this like 20-foot gap of sand, which then restricts you from getting down to the water. So it's this kind of like the interface between where you park your car and have all your gear and then where the water is. Sometimes it's, only like 5, 10, 15 feet, but that is the restriction.
Do you find that people's perceptions as well of what's safe on the water for people with, talking specifically about spinal cord injuries, but people who maybe do have a wheelchair, is there a perception that they can't do things like this? Is that changing?
Um, I think it's probably maybe the other way round, that there's probably lots of people with different disabilities that don't feel confident enough to get on the water because they perceive it as being wet, cold. What if I fall in? How am I going to get back in? Or if I can't see, or if I can't hear what's going on, or if I can't understand I think that the nature of water is that it is perceived as being dangerous. So I think there's that aspect going on, but then there's also the perception of how different water sports view disability, and and that can sometimes be a challenge as well.
So somebody who's listening and thinks, gosh, actually, I'd love to give this a go. I love being on the water. Are there places out there where they can actually go in order to learn to be more confident in the water, to learn these different sports, particularly paddleboarding, inclusive paddleboarding?
I think the inclusive paddleboarding, the project that we're doing, is probably right at the forefront in regards to getting access to to paddleboarding, because again there is a very strong drive with its stand up paddleboarding. So we're trying to kind of challenge that, but there's some really good surfing programs. So helping people with disabilities to get involved in surfing, and there's lots of bike kind of activities going on with adaptive bikes to support people. There's lots of those programs around. There's sailability for people with disabilities wanting to get involved in sailing. So there's a number of different options available. And then you've got things like the national parks, you've got all of the Sustrans and the cycle trails, which just by their nature are quite safe. So there's lots of places where you can go and experience the outdoors. There's lots of different activities that you can access, but you have to have that sort of like confidence to be able to kind of like wander into an activity centre and kind of say, hi, I'm here and this is what I want to do. Which I think that's sort of like a different set of, it's like your own barriers holding you back.
So with the inclusive paddleboarding, then obviously this is where you've developed this sort of sit or the support system, the seat or the support system. Is that available generally, or is it something that's still a work in progress?
So there's different sort of kind of products, I suppose. What for the project that we're running down in Dorset, that I'm building seats that are modular so that they can accommodate different paddlers of different sizes and who need different levels of support. So that gives flexibility, so that when different people come in to access the water, we've got one. Initially, we were going to have to build. I was going to make different sizes, and I kind of thought, well, that's just a waste of material. So can I make it modular? So that was what I set about doing. But then for myself, I've got my own sort of like custom made seat that's built around my shape as such. So at the moment, the focus is on building the seats and the kneeling support seats for the project. But then I'm also getting some interest from different people who have asked me to build a seat for them as well.
Interesting. I'm just thinking, because everything that comes around there seems to be some sort of eventually some sort of sport that gets linked to it, and I don't mean just sort of participating in sport generally, but competition. So are there competitions for this type of paddleboarding, inclusive paddleboarding, or is that something that you see maybe happening in the future? There's para canoeing, which is sort of like elite level canoeing, which is in the Paralympics.
So there is a lot of, there are a lot of people competing in that, but obviously that's at an elite level. And then the BCU have a number of different programs that they run for to encourage people to access kayaking and canoeing. I think where I've got to with the paddleboarding project is that because a paddleboard is very wide and it's got a flat bottom, means that it's very stable. So it works very differently than a canoe, because a canoe has got a curved bottom and it wants to roll over. So a paddleboard is inherently stable. If you fall off of it, it's much easier to get back on. So in my head, it's kind of like thinking, well, for a lot of people with disabilities, and maybe other people as well who want to just experience being out in the water, being on a paddleboard and using it like a kayak is a way of sort of, I suppose, merging the two, merging paddleboarding and kayaking together. So it's, I mean, when you look at all of the water sports at the moment, they're all sort of like merging, like we started off with kite surfing, and then we've got foil kites, and, there's all these different kind of like bits taken from different areas and then combined. And that's really what this project has done. It's taken my experience of kayaking and then what I've been doing, what I've seen with the paddleboard, and then merged the two together.
No, it sounds really, really interesting. Is it something that people need, like water-based sport instructors need to be trained in to support people who want to do this type of paddleboarding, or is it something that a good water sports instructor or a good paddleboard instructor should be able to adapt?
That's a really interesting question. I would like to think that a good instructor could do this work. However, when you're working with, and I think it just depends on the type of people you're working with. If you're working with someone who's got a high level of need, then they might need some really specialist seating. But one of the things that we've said within our project is to be looking at, we want to be working with people that we know that can swim. So that kind of, at the moment, that caters for a group of people that we know are probably going to be more physically kind of capable, and they need to be able to paddle as well. So we're targeting that group at the moment, but then there might be other people that want to come in and have a more of an experience, as opposed to looking at wanting to do it more, from a practical kind of point of view.
It sounds like the sort of thing that I think I can see it being in, like adventure camps and holidays and things where people can try it and in a controlled environment, and then hopefully come home and say, right, this is what I want to do. This is what I want my activity to be involved with.
There's lots of activity centres around the country, and a lot of them will offer kayaking and canoeing, and they'll also offer paddleboarding as well. So one of the things that I'm going to be doing during the winter is to just start connecting with them and sort of saying, look, here's a product that you might want to consider. And then I also want to do some more filming to be able to show how to use it and how to set it all up. And in the hope then that we can, if you've got sort of like disability activity centres, and then you've got mainstream activity centres, and it would be, ultimately it would be amazing to have some of this seating in both of those different types of activity, or in all activity centres, so that then whoever rocks up has the chance to be able to get out on the water.
Give it a go. And anyone who knows me knows one of my kind of specialist interests is to do with mental health, and we know how beneficial being in around on water is for our mental health. So tell me about the mental health benefits of something like this.
Well, my happy place is on the water. I've been underneath it, scuba diving and snorkeling. I've done sailing and tall ship sailing and water skiing, and they're all great. But being on a paddleboard on the water, there's just something about being able to just experience everything that's happening on the water. Some people want to go really quickly. I'm kind of like a soul paddler, that I just want to, I want to stop and listen and be mindful and aware of what's happening, because there's always stuff going on. And if you paddle too quickly, you miss it all. So for me, it's where I can be reflective. It's where I can just switch off. So today, believe it or not, was the first time I've been out on my paddleboard on my own. So I went down to a friend of mine who's got a paddleboarding shop, which has got access straight onto the water. So I rocked up to there. I said, "Look, I'm desperate to get out on the water. The weather's been rubbish. I just need to." He was like, "Yeah, no problem." So he gave me a hand to get my paddleboard, and I jumped on. And he said, "If you're not back in an hour, I'll come and see if I can find you." And I said, "Don't worry, I'll be back in an hour." But once I literally went around the corner, and I was kind of like, "I'm here. I'm doing it. I'm on my own. I feel really comfortable. I know if I fall off, I can get back on." I'm like, and it was just the most amazing experience to have that kind of complete freedom, and so for my mental health, it's great. And then yesterday, I was working with some people with spinal injuries and helping them to get on the water, using the seats, getting some feedback from them. And one of the guys I was working with, he was trying to work out which way he wanted his feet. He said to me, "Oh, my feet always sort of like are not in the right position that I want them to be in." And we managed to get it so that his feet and his legs were straight out in front of him. And he said, "That's the first time since I've been injured that my legs have been out in front of me, and it felt amazing." And he said, "I know that sounds weird, but it was amazing." And I was kind of like, if that's amazing for you, then I'm going to take that. So and that had nothing really to do with the paddleboard, but it was just the seating and the phone that we had. We were able to do that. So I think it works on lots of different levels. But for me, it's around helping others. It's connecting with people. It's being physical. It gives me a chance to be mindful, and I'm learning every time I'm out. And I think that for someone who tries it, the community is really, really nice. The paddleboarding community is just so friendly. Everyone is learning all of the time because it's a new sport. It's physical. It's as physical as you want it to be, and it's not a fast sport in the sense it's not about kind of lots of people race, but a lot of people go out to just experience being out on the water,
right.
And that's built into it. So on all of those different levels of mental health, it ticks all the boxes.
There must be opportunity as well for it to be very relaxing for people. Like you say, if people are going slow, it must be a very relaxing, a very kind of just meditative experience almost.
It is. It's got a lot of therapeutic qualities to it. One of the things that with kayaking, you see people can go out in quite heavy seas and quite difficult weather because of the nature of the boat, and which is brilliant for them. And I was never able to do that. But with paddleboarding, because if you're standing, or if you're sitting, is that you're quite restricted with if it's really windy, you're not going to go out, because if you're standing, you turn into a human sail. And even if you're sitting, because you're, you have to be very kind of conscious of the wind. So you tend to go out in nice weather, which then in itself means that you're going to be enjoying the environment that you're in. For me, it's I saw a heron today, just literally just flying off. And I just saw these huge wings, and it was kind of like, wow, you don't see that every day.
I've done a couple of episodes with people who very much promote being active in nature, and it is such an important part, isn't it, of our makeup. You know, all our cells, everything is drawn to the water, to nature, and it's so important to get out there when we can. And this, I guess, gives a lot of opportunity to people who might otherwise not be able to experience the water, in a way that it's an activity, but it's also a little bit of a challenge, but it's something that's so popular at the moment. It's that ability to do something. And I know that adventuring is something that you've always been into. So how's your spinal injury affected your adventuring? Because I think for a lot of people, will want to know, you know, what can I do, rather than, well, that's an end to everything I want to do.
I mean, my adventuring has been more travelling. So I've kind of done a lot of travelling to lots of different countries, some for work and some for leisure, which has always been a really important part for me, because I love that, learning about different cultures, and also understanding like perspective, kind of being in the Ukraine or being in Malaysia or being in Central America. You just have to see life from a different angle. And I've always appreciated that. I mean, I've never done any of the crazy stuff like climbing Kilimanjaro, or, you know, doing any marathons or swimming the Channel. That's never been my big thing. I just like the experience. Like needing to do like big heroic things is not my bag. So just being out. I've got an electric bike attachment that fits on the front of my chair, which I got when my son got a 5-speed bike and became much, much faster than me. And I'd always resisted wanting to have this go electric. But within, I don't know, a month, I just realized how adventurous I could be with it. And I've now had it since 2018, and I've done nearly 3,000 miles with it. And it's just that.
And you can keep up with him as well as he gets better.
I mean, he's now 11, so he's kind of like he but he can go faster than me, but he can't sustain it. So I can always catch up with him in the end. But that experience, just being able to go out and do a 30-40 mile bike ride is, for me, it's just the most, exciting thing to go and do. And then I can go and do that with friends, and so that connects people in together. So it's and that's on my doorstep. Dorset's just amazing for that.
I do think, for me, as I say, nature's a big thing for me when it comes to activity, and I just love being able to get out into nature and noticing things. And I think this is where, for me, running's never been an option for various reasons. My body really isn't interested. But walking, you notice so much, don't you? And you see so many things. And I imagine being on the water, you see a lot more of nature from a different angle, from a different perspective, that you would miss if you were just walking along a riverbank or walking along the shore. If you were you just must, when you're on the board, see things from a very different perspective.
I mean, like today, because I was paddling in quite shallow water, you can see all of the bottom, you can see all of the fish. Then you kind of like, that you've got swans going by. Then this beautiful heron took off, and then there's, I've been on one of the rivers locally to me. You have to just sit and spend quite a bit of time, but every now and again you might see a kingfisher, which is a really, you just see this blue bolt of lightning, and there's otters around, there's white swans and black swans, and all of that. I don't know, for me, it never gets boring. It's always the opportunity to experience you never quite know what's around the corner. It's kind of that's part of the adventure.
It's amazing, isn't it, when you get up close with nature and you just feel a connection. There is an innate connection within us, isn't it? And I think a lot of people have got such busy lives that they've stopped just being in nature. And I think it's so important for me. And I know for a lot of people who get back into it, find it's really important. And for me, being on the water or being near the water, it's a big important thing for me. But what are you hoping to achieve through the Inclusive Paddleboarding project? What's your goal?
What's my goal? Well, I've just been bought or just got the inclusive paddleboarding.co.uk domain name, and what I really want to do is to start populating that with as much information as I can to be able to empower and enable other people to get involved. So obviously there'll be a lot about the project, but I want to go out and kind of create as much content as I can, showing what's possible, or if you're going to go and try and launch from a river, what do you need? How does that look? If you're going to do a beach launch, what does that look like? What equipment do you need? And then hopefully to maybe even try and build up videos of different people paddling, to be able to share those stories, and maybe to come up with a map of where are good launch points across the country, or which organisations have got maybe some of this equipment that we're building. So that will have, that's what I'm in my head. That's what I'm kind of thinking, and I don't see any reason why that won't happen.
I think, well, it's use a water analogy. Once you start a ripple, it spreads, and people start to hear about it, and people start to want to get involved, and that's the most important thing. It just struck me that you're talking about launching, so safe places to launch. Presumably, if it's safe to launch from, it's equally safe to come back and get out of the water. Because I imagine that must be something that people maybe are a bit nervous about at first. Can they get out of the water once they're on it?
Yeah, it is. It's getting down into the water is sometimes easier than getting back out of the water, often just because you've gone out and done something, so your arms are feeling a bit tired, and so it's a bit more of a challenge. So that's one of the things that I've just been sort of trying to work out at the moment, certainly from being able to go paddling independently. But I think we would always advocate that you go paddling with someone else who can help you out, because it's just from a safety point of view. You would always suggest that, and so if you've got that, then that's going to be the way to keep you as safe as possible.
It sounds like, is there anybody that it's definitely not suitable for? Is there a certain level of fitness or ability you need in order to give it a go in the first place?
That would be a really difficult one to judge, really. I think I would always be wanting, basically you've got to be able to move your arms, you've got to be able to maneuver and handle a paddle, and you've got a buoyancy aid on. So I mean, there are situations where you maybe have two people on a paddleboard, so you can get like really, really long and wide paddleboards, so you can kind of fit like lots of different people on the paddleboards. So there's right. All sorts of different variations. So I don't think that there are any restrictions particularly, although to be going and independently paddling, then there would be certain restrictions.
But somebody who wanted to give it a go, the best thing would be to contact someone like you and say, right, here's the situation, I really want to give it a go, and they can give it a go. Try it and see what happens.
So let's say down in Dorset, there are a lot of paddleboarding companies, and they, I haven't really done much work with them, but I think they tend to have quite an open mind to different people paddling. I would encourage anyone to, just to do some research to find out what different companies are out there, and to contact them. Some of the leisure companies, the outdoor activity companies might be able to help as well. But I'm always happy to act as a kind of a conduit, signpost kind of people, because I'm right at the early stages of it. I'm just starting to build my network up. So I was talking to someone in Northern Ireland 2 weeks ago about the project that they've got running for people with disabilities in Northern Ireland to get access to the water. And I was talking to someone in Scotland and someone else in Wales. And so my network is slowly starting to expand. But, and it's lovely to be at that point.
So where can people get hold of you if they want to find out more? You mentioned you've just bought a website, but is it up and running?
The website hasn't been done yet, but I have a Facebook page, which is the Seated and Kneeling Inclusive Paddleboarding Project.
Right, so I'll make sure that goes out with the links.
Yeah, and so you can contact. So that's where I'm posting everything at the moment that I'm doing, and the people are commenting and giving me suggestions and ideas. So that's where I'm updating that, and I've also got an Instagram account, although I haven't had an Instagram account before, so I'm having to learn how to do all this social media stuff, which is kind of interesting. But the website will get set up in the next, over the winter, and then hopefully it will be ready for for next spring when people when hopefully we have some nice weather.
That'd be good. I'll definitely put the link to the Facebook group in though. So overall, then, how important do you think it is for people to have access to this type of opportunity, whether they are a wheelchair user, spinal cord injury, or any kind of disability? How important is it that the providers out there make their provision a lot more inclusive, a lot more accessible?
Well, I think they're missing a trick if they don't, because when I see the range of different people that are out on paddleboards now, it's a very easy and accessible activity to get involved in. And so the more support that providers can give, I think that's financially beneficial to them, and would, I think, almost set a new benchmark for access to water sports, because some water sports are quite, sailing is has its own restrictions, and kayaking and canoeing have a number of challenges just because of the nature of the craft that you're using. So I think paddleboarding has got an opportunity to, because it's new, it's quite embryonic, that it's got the opportunity to be something that maybe some of the other older activities maybe struggle with a bit.
So it definitely sounds like there's a place for everybody, and it's an activity, a sport, whatever you want to call it, whether you want it to be just a little bit of activity or whether you want it to be much more of a sport for yourself. It sounds like that it's shaping up to be a very inclusive and a very accessible way of being active, which is what we want, really. Activity for all.
Absolutely.
I will make sure that all the links are in there when the podcast goes out. Is there anything you'd like to add at all?
I just really, it's been lovely to have the opportunity to be able to talk about the project and be able to share some of the ideas and the concepts that we've got out there, and hopefully it maybe will give people some food for thought in terms of getting out on the water and enjoying it.
It's certainly making me think about if I can sit down. Standing up on a paddleboard's always made me a bit nervous, but if I can sit down to start with, then I'd certainly like that. And that, there may be a lot of people out there who maybe have poor fitness, poor mobility, who are a bit nervous about it but want to give it a go. So starting off by sitting or kneeling might well be a really good way to get more people moving. Brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on. That
seems to be the feedback we're getting, which is brilliant.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much for coming along. You've been listening to me chatting with Will about inclusive paddleboarding. So thank you very much again, Will, and we will see you all on the next episode. Thank you for listening to Creating Active Lives with me, Sarah Blytho, and my guests. Join me each week for more on how to create and sustain everyday activity, and follow me online at Fitness Career Mentor or Fabulous if you're interested in career development and more on creating active lifestyles.